Hey everybody, welcome to the Cripescast. I'm your host, Charlie Behrens. This is the podcast where we talk to people for and or from the Midwest. And geez Louise, I want to thank all of you for who bought the Midwest Survival Guide. It's out now officially as of today, as of recording this on Tuesday. So boy, that feels pretty good. Still doing some press stuff for it and all that. But last week, 100% of the proceeds of my proceeds from the book went to the Center for Veterans Issues. We don't have a final tally yet, but it's gonna be a fair amount. I think it's north of $6,000, and so that's pretty cool. Again, that's all a testament to all of you who saw that that's where the proceeds were going and knew that was what you wanted to support, and you support it. CVI, again, Ed Garza, who runs CVI, was on the Cripescast a few weeks ago, and they are just doing incredible things for veterans to help homelessness and to give veterans resources. They're working on an app to develop that. And so they do amazing work. So thank you all for your support of the Midwest Survival Guide, but also that organization. Today, my guest is Kristin Brey. Now, some of you might know Kristin from the video we released last year, which is called Midwest Horror Story. She's the actress in that. But Kristin does a lot of stuff outside of acting. She actually born and raised in Wisconsin, and then moved to Los Angeles at the age of 16 to pursue an acting career. Ended up that didn't work out. That wasn't what she ultimately wanted. So she started doing tech, worked in the tech industry, and then during the last election moved back to Wisconsin to start focusing on politics. And her organization, As Goes Wisconsin, is nonpartisan, and it focuses on these very small local issues that you would think are, kind of small potatoes, but really, when you look at the larger scale of the American political landscape, it's these very small issues that, essentially lead to who we have leading our counties, our cities, our states, and then our government. And so, and that's kind of plays into the name of her brand, As Goes Wisconsin, so goes the country. I think that's the play on words there, but that's been true in a lot of cases recently. Wisconsin has become a very purple state. A lot of people very far right here, a lot of people far left here, a lot of people in the middle. Now, I wanted to bring Kristin on in part to talk about her work at As Goes Wisconsin, because I think especially this day and age when local news is losing funding, it's tough to get people to cover local issues, much less care about them. But what Kristin does, she takes these local issues and she makes them funny and she makes them digestible through TikTok and through Instagram. And it's really powerful stuff. Now, there are a ton of people focusing on national issues, but there's not a lot of people focusing on these hyper-local issues. But these hyper-local issues are most important if you are actually, concerned about making a difference and changing things. So anyway, I've been a big fan of hers for a while. And specifically, I wanted to bring her on to talk about gerrymandering. If you're unfamiliar with gerrymandering, here, I'll give you let's find a Google definition. What's funny is gerrymandering is one of those things that we're all like, yeah, no, that's just part of politics. It's standard practice. And if you look up the definition, it literally says manipulate the boundaries of an electoral constituency so as to favor one party or class. The very definition just says, yeah, I'm a terrible politician. I have bad policy, so I'm just going to cheat. And that's how I'm going to get ahead. But gerrymandering has been around for a long, long time. It should really just go away. There are nonpartisan ways to divide districts that don't involve one party controlling the levers of that or another. Iowa is one state that has done this, or at least attempted to. Wisconsin's a state where I don't even think they've attempted it, And yes, this is a Democrat and Republican issue. They're both responsible for gerrymandering. Right now, it's the Republicans who are really in favor of gerrymandering because they have the power and they're trying to hold on to it. And I just think, at the end of the day, if you're a good politician, you're against gerrymandering because it's exactly what it says it is. It's manipulating the process so you can win because you are not good at your job. But it's one of the most angering things because essentially what happens is that, politicians will draw lines around these districts that essentially allow them to stay in power. So what happens is you have these hardcore conservative politicians and hardcore liberal politicians. They don't get primaried by more moderate politicians for the most part. They get primaried by more extreme politicians. Because you're not going to win. Like if there is a hardcore Republican district and I am a liberal and I'm a Democrat, I know that I'm not going to have a chance there. So they have very safe seats, and the only time their seat is in jeopardy is when they get primaried by someone who has a more extreme position than they do. So say they're a moderate Republican, the only time they're really going to get primaried is if it's by, like a hardcore Trump guy. And then that is, if you pull back then and look at the country, that's one of the reasons we're very politically polarized in this country. So it's frustrating that it exists. How do we get this to change? You'll hear about that from Kristin, so I will let her speak. But before we get into that, I do want to thank our title sponsor for this podcast, Jolly Good Soda. Made right here in Wisconsin, Random Lake, Wisconsin. And if you would like to get your hands on some Jolly Good, just head into any grocery store and ask the manager for that Jolly Good if you don't see it sitting out. If you're outside of Wisconsin, all you got to do is go to jollygoodssoda.com. You can order yours. And ladies and gentlemen, I use that sour power in my brandy old fashioned. Cheese Louise, I like it sour. All right, and before we get to the interview, I just want to thank all of you for rating the podcast and leaving comments and subscribing to our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's at Cripescast. And okie dokes, that's it. Let's get to my conversation with Kristin Brey. Can you start off by giving us a sense of what you're working on right now?
Yeah. So I am still running As Goes Wisconsin, which was it's a social media. It's basically like the Daily Show before Wisconsin, where we make jokes about Wisconsin politics and kind of explain the news in fun short videos that are usually under a minute on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, kind of, but mostly on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. So that's still going strong. And then on top of that, I'm the first video columnist at the Journal Sentinel, which is it falls under their opinion ideas lab, but it is meant to kind of do the same thing I do with As Goes Wisconsin, but for the Journal Sentinel, where it's like doing things that are about democracy and civics and explaining them in fun ways that can reach new audiences. Because I think sometimes reading about local and state politics is boring. And so finding new fun ways to do that is kind of my main focus on everything I do.
That's pretty cool. Now, let's start with As Goes Wisconsin, because that was sort of your start into getting into this, these like hyper local, but also very important political and social issues and everything. Not everybody decides to do something like you're doing. In fact, I can't think of many other media entities like yours. So what made you want to move back to Wisconsin and start this?
So I'm from Madison, grew up in Madison. When I was 16, I was a very willful teenager with very supportive parents, and I moved to LA to be an actress. So I had a performing background and always loved performing. But by the time I was around 20, I was like, I should go to college. So I ended up graduating from Berkeley, that's where I got more into politics and like public policy, thinking I would work for a nonprofit after I graduated. But it was the Bay Area. So then I worked in tech for a long time. Then around 2016, I was actually in New York. And the political atmosphere was such that I was like, I don't think I want to sell software for the rest of my life. I think there's other things that I find more interesting and more fun. So I got back into performing. I started doing stand-up. I started doing sketch. I started doing improv. And one of the things that I realized that I really liked to do was this concept of like what a lot of comedians do really well, whether it's Last Week Tonight or Daily Show, and even like Vox and Vice and some of the news organizations and the videos they were making of like, how do you take complicated issues and use humor to explain them? And so instead of trying to like be a 30-year-old like PA on one of these shows, I was like, I'm just going to teach myself how to do this. So I started filming myself, putting myself on camera, and taught myself how to edit. And so originally it was called Below the Fold, and that was more national issues. And with all the work that I was doing on that, I moved back to LA. And then I thought, oh, I have this idea for a documentary. 2020 was coming up. Wisconsin's a very weird state when it comes to voting. And every 4 years, it's a big swing state. But it's not just a swing state. It's like in 2018, 12% of the voters voted for both. Was it 12? I think it was like something like 12% voted for both like Scott Walker and Tandy Baldwin, which is like, on paper makes zero sense, but yet for enough voters, that makes sense for them. And so I was like, oh, like I think a documentary would be really interesting to come home and focus on all these different target demographics that are going to like the make or break vote. So like suburban women or the Black vote in Milwaukee or young voters or whatever, and swing voters. So I got back to my parents' house, who they now live in central Wisconsin, on March 15th, 2020. And 2 days later, the entire world shut down. And so all of the, in-person documentary style interviews couldn't happen anymore. But what I had become really good at was making these short videos and just like short, straight to camera style, set up punchline, here's the news type videos. And since I was stuck at my parents' house, I was like, I guess I'll just start making these. And so it started with a video showing people how to get their absentee ballot, and me leveraging the fact that my mother is awful with technology, as a lot of our parents are, and teaching her how to upload her ID and get her absentee ballot for the spring primary last year. And that video did really well. And so then it just became, for most of 2020, or all of 2020, predominantly a get out the vote, like social media videos. And we did a couple together, which was really fun for Badgers Vote. And then when the election, and it did so well, it was doing a lot better than Below the Fold. And so it's like, I think I have to move back to Wisconsin. And so everything just was going so well. And I think it was received in a way because, like you said, like where there's a lot of stuff, like there's kind of an oversaturation of content for national news and national politics. There was no one really doing it for Wisconsin. Like, and there's a lot of news here. Like we're an important state in a lot of ways, but we're also kind of a state that like predicts kind of what like the temperature of the country. And so it's like, there's plenty of stand-up comedians in Wisconsin who are, I'm sure, on stage talking about it, but no one was really doing it online. I was like, all right, I'm coming back to Wisconsin. I'm going to try to build this thing. And so that's mostly what this year's been about, of like, sometimes the videos are about, the news, sometimes it's about politics, sometimes it's about voting, but then sometimes it's also just about like fun Wisconsin stuff that's like the Packers, or documenting the Bucks run up, because that was so much fun, and trying to make a new way to talk about news, or like at least state news, that isn't either infuriating, like a lot of some talk show hosts really try to rile people up.
There's a lot of that in Milwaukee. There's a lot of angry dudes shouting at microphones in this city.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's just a new, different way to talk about this stuff without the emotions having to be so high. And I think that turns off a lot of people. It just depresses me. And so how do you reach people who kind of otherwise, like, that's not their jam, is to like always stay up to date on, Robin Voss.
Right. Well, and that is interesting because especially this day and age, local news has lost a lot of, budget. And I worked in local news, so I'm kind of speaking from experience here, but there's not as much of an interest in going after the local important news stories. At least when I was working, it was a lot of like reconfiguring national stories, because that appears to be what people care about, and put in a few local stories. But that budget to get those like sort of investigative reporters in there, really figuring out the most important issues going on in your state, it's kind of like blown over, because that's a very expensive thing to do. I like the way you're doing it, because, I mean, while you may not always be necessarily doing like this hard-hitting journalism, like investigative type stuff, you are really diving into these very nuanced issues that not a lot of people know about. People maybe heard the name gerrymandering or something like that. Many people don't really know what it is. And until we kind of break through that and also say, like, how does it apply to me today, and what can I do about it? I think you do a really good job of breaking a lot of these things down. Was that like your entry into this, though, was seeing like this sort of void in that kind of coverage and thinking you can fill it? Or did that happen more organically?
I think that happened because I didn't live here for 17 years. Like that's the kind of the fun joke about, the feedback I get on the stuff. It's like you talk to Wisconsinites like really well, which is great, but it's also like I didn't live here as an adult. And so it's like there's a lot of my own learning of what the issues are by being back. And so it's only through being back and doing all the stuff for last year that was about voting that I started to realize like everything you just said. There's budget issues, but it's also a lot of state and local news are still just like confined to very traditional formats, right? Like you have the newspapers that are mostly all gobbled up by Gannett. And so they have their rules of how they're distributing stuff. And like, it's a very, very big company. And like, you have really good journalists, but the format is like, it's still just the written word. And I say this as I'm, working with them, like they don't only do podcasts, right? Like they could be doing a daily podcast, just like the daily from, the New York Times or Today Explained from Vox or NPR's or, of like actually being able to, in a different medium, say the same news. But they're not doing that right now. Or like the same nightly news, like 5 p.m. that my mom still watches every single night. But I don't know anyone our age or younger that watches the nightly news, right? And so I think millennials and younger get their news in different ways. And I just realized that by being back, that there was a gap where there's so much of it nationally. There was a gap here. It's like I don't, like you said, I don't do firsthand reporting. I take the things that I'm reading and turn them into videos, because I feel like you can reach more people who are just like spending their day on TikTok, flipping through it. And like, while they may hear stuff that's going on, of the presidential race, they maybe had no idea what was going on in their like assembly or state Senate race last year. And so like, how do you get people excited about those things?
Yeah, and also understanding the systems in play and understanding that there is a system and there is a reason certain things are happening. And I know one of the issues that you care a lot about then that has really impacted Wisconsin is gerrymandering. So and right there, as soon as I say gerrymandering, I can just see eyes glazing over.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But
totally.
like, explain what gerrymandering is for those who don't know.
So the process of redistricting, that's like I think those two words often get interchanged, but the redistricting is a process that has to happen every 10 years. And basically, just like we take the census every 10 years, after the census, that information gets used to make sure that there is the same amount of people in every district, whether we're talking about state senators or state assembly, or even in your city for like your aldermanic and like your city council reps. So there's like, basically that has to break down because each representative needs to represent basically the same amount of people, right? And people move, people, die, people are born. And so like we knew in Wisconsin this year, most of the state, it was either flat or declined in population besides Dane County. So obviously there needs to be shifts around to accommodate those population shifts. So that has to happen no matter what. Gerrymandering is the manipulation of that process to gain more political power. And so it basically is, how do you fudge the lines so that you, based on voting records, consolidate people who vote one way into as few districts as possible, or make sure that there's like only a handful of those voters in districts that predominantly vote the other way, kind of like diluting their vote. And basically, if you do it in a certain way that Wisconsin for Republicans, but Illinois for Democrats, like this happens on both sides of whoever actually has the power to approve and draw the maps. And the problem with it is not because it's like, oh, this is a Democrat versus Republican thing. It's that people then end up in safe seats. So you get districts where it's so red that like a Democrat's never going to win, or, parts of Madison, Milwaukee, where it's so blue that Republicans never going to win. And what that drives is then hyper partisanship, that their only threat is either not getting funding from the party because they didn't go along with what the party was doing. Like they can't just stand up for themselves and do it, like vote the way they want, because they have to do what the party's telling them to, or getting primaried by someone even more extreme than them. It's part of the reason I think a lot of people think like how partisan and like gridlocked things have become, because people are not being held accountable to their actual constituents. because with gerrymandering, the politicians pick voters instead of voters picking politicians.
Right.
What was that?
No, that's a great line right there. Yeah. But I mean, it's cheating is essentially what it is. What's right isn't always law, and what's law isn't always right. And gerrymandering isn't right at all. It's just bullshit. But the fact that it stays around, and now we have these, you're right, more extreme politicians are the ones primarying. So all we end up with is more extremes. And when you throw that into the mix with news, which then is also become hyper partisan, and then our national politics, it's just a recipe for disaster. And I think if you look at the American political landscape over the past, decade, disaster is pretty accurate for what it's become.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? If you're upset with gerrymandering in this practice, what can citizens do?
This is the frustrating part, because it's not like, go vote. That feels like a very direct call to action of like, just don't be complacent, go vote. And the problem with gerrymandering is the people that we just said are, because of gerrymandering, they're in safe seats, and so they don't have to be accountable to their constituents. So when the call to action is to call your senators and let them know that you're against gerrymandering, like, it's very easy to feel like, well, why would they do anything? And so, but that for right now is kind of the best thing you can do, is be like, 10 years ago, when Wisconsin, well, so we'll use Wisconsin since we're in Wisconsin, when no one was paying attention to this, right? Like, I think what happened in a lot of states 10 years ago was the first time that it could be so unbelievably precise in the way that those maps were drawn. Because while gerrymandering's been around, or this idea of gerrymandering's been around since like 1880, like it's always kind of been like this. With new technology and the software and the algorithms that we had access to in 2010, and how much more advanced they were than they were in 2000, how unbelievably precise the maps became. Like, literally, there's certain districts, I think it's Senate District 8. It's someone's like literally you can see like someone's house was like drawn into a district. Like, it's just like bloop. And so that's how it's like it got so extreme in so many different places over the last 10 years. And so, but the good thing is, like, we can actually also use that algorithm to create great maps, right? Like, we can do, like, if we take out the voting demographics and use it for like communities of interest, and use it for like, you look at like natural boundaries of counties or cities or school districts, or like the things like we all use the same, the river, of like the like bodies of water, and like things that a group of people care about, and it would behoove them to have the same representatives who also care about those issues. Like, if you use that kind of information, we can also use that technology now to draw like really fair representative maps. And that's not, in certain states or certain districts, like, it's not about making sure it's 50-50, it's making sure that it's representative, right? And so the only thing that we can do really is just continue to, like, as I said in my last video when I did this for Journal Sentinel, is be like pull a Robert De Niro from Meet the Parents, be like, I'm watching you, fucker.
Yeah.
and like, and tell them like, you're paying attention this time. And then also pay attention, because like, the thing with gerrymandering is it's so boring and it's so complicated to explain, but it precedes everything else that people really get fired up about, whether it's like medical marijuana or recreational marijuana or universal gun check, like background checks, or expanding badger care, which is it's all these things that are super, super popular and people really care about. But again, if they're not accountable, like if your representatives aren't accountable to you, why would they pass these things that really, it's like there's certain lobbyists who are the ones in there being like, yeah, we don't want this passed. So,
well, yeah, and lobbying's a whole other thing. I mean, that's cheating as well. You're basically just paying these guys to bribe these politicians, through corporate campaign donations, which there's no accountability on these campaign donations either. I mean, the whole system's messed up, but the reason it's going to continue to stay messed up is obviously this gerrymandering. Now, there is a state that was able to effectively do this well, and that's Iowa. Can you talk about how Iowa differed from Wisconsin?
So I think what's interesting now is, so there's a handful of states, Iowa being one of them, that have independent, nonpartisan committees now. And it's kind of different in each state of like, committees that are drawing the maps, but they still have to be approved by the legislature, or they're just approved because that's the committee and like how that's happening. And this is kind of the first time I think that we're going to see like how that works out. And so I have not stayed up to date with how Iowa is doing right now, but I know that we often point to them. And what's funny about why Iowa actually passed it, because in Wisconsin in 2009, Democrats held like both chambers, and like they could have basically the Democrats had full control right before we took the last census, and they had the chance, and there were certain people who were advocating like, let's pass nonpartisan redistricting. Democrats thought they were going to hold on to power, and so they didn't. And this is why it's like both sides do it. And then obviously Scott Walker and Republicans had full control by 2011, and when they redrew the maps. And so the same thing was happening in Iowa, except I think it was Democrats also held the power, and they passed it because they knew that there was going to be a red wave. And so it was still political, the reason they did it. Like there was their best chance to actually not get just demolished. And so they do it. So it's like if they have an independent committee do the maps, and then it gets approved. And so if you look at how the maps look for the different districts in Iowa, like they actually look like compact districts, and they're not like squiggly lines everywhere, just like including people here and there. And so I think there's still issues. Like it's still going to be an imperfect process because committees are appointed by politicians. And it's like, we saw the same thing with the Wisconsin Elections Committee and all the problems they're having right now in Wisconsin, as far as, there was 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and how that worked out. And we're still having fights over the election investigations.
Yeah, that's a productive use of time.
That's a productive use of time and money. But I think it's a step in the right direction, because I do think like, while the committees are not going to be perfect, the fact that we let politicians secure their own seats, like that just can't be the way, right? And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how this works out in the states that have tried to do it in a new, better way. And if it works out better, maybe there's be more people who are convinced. But it's just the thing that's problematic is like, we don't get another shot at doing this for another 10 years, right? Like it's not something like, it's not even like the president that we get to change every 4 years, or our senator that we get to change every 6 years. It's like, it's another decade. Like, I don't know what you were doing 10 years ago, but like my life changed a lot in 10 years.
Yeah, you got engaged. Jeez.
I got engaged.
Congratulations. It is one of those things, though. But, anytime I think for people out there, if you look at your politicians, whether they're Republican or Democrat, but if they are pro gerrymandering, they're just basically a bad politician, because if they were a good politician, they wouldn't need to rely on, essentially this form of like sanctioned cheating in order to maintain their seat. And I think when that becomes the perception, then it's easier to make change on it. But the fact that this thing's called gerrymandering, and that the lack of information most people have on it is, and that's no like shame to anybody who doesn't really know the story behind it. It's intentionally very complicated. And these lobbyists and lawmakers know exactly what they're doing when they make things like this overly complicated. It's that people stop paying attention. They're running out the clock on people's time and energy that they can put toward change. So again, props to you making these very digestible things to inform people in the state of what's going on. Have you seen success with your audience in that they appreciate what you're doing, that they see what you're doing, that it's helping them figure this stuff out more, or is it still an uphill battle?
I mean, it's all anecdotal. Like it's like, monitoring comments and stuff like that is like my best gauge at how much I'm actually helping. But I would say like the thing that really stuck out to me that was probably one of the best comments I've ever gotten was that we had a spring election this year that was after having record turnout for the presidential election in last November. I think Wisconsin, it was like the highest it's ever been or something like that, of how many people turned out to actually vote. Then for the superintendent race that we had in April, I think we had like 7% voter turnout. It was like not great, but it's also like you said, it's like we just did this. How are we having another election? Like, why does this make sense? And like,
Right.
what does a superintendent of schools do? Like, it's like,
Right.
it's more complicated, and like the public information is not always fun. It's like, why does this affect me? And so, but I had a woman leave a comment because I did some coverage of like, you should vote. This is what this position does. This is why it's important. These are the candidates. And I had a woman leave a comment saying, this is the first time I've ever voted in a non-presidential race. And it was because of your videos.
Wow.
And that meant a lot. Because I think that is the thing. And I've had a couple of those. That one always stands out to me. But I've had a couple of those of like deep appreciation in the comment section of like, I love your stuff. Keep it up. Like, people like ask for like, I don't have a Patreon, but like, people who are like, I want like, this is great information. And so I think whenever I get comments like that, like it so supersedes any of the like trolley comments I get, because it's like, oh, these are actually making a difference and they're actually reaching people. And so that for me, as much as I like love to make people laugh, I love making the videos, like actually feeling like I'm having some kind of impact on like people's civic awareness is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's, again, is it difficult to turn what you're doing into a business model? And I think that the reason I ask that is I think that's a big reason that a lot of these other entities, whether it's local news or local publications, they haven't been able to, you don't see a lot of the content you're doing because it's very difficult, but then also like, is it able to sustain itself monetarily for these things? What is that process like for you?
So this year's been interesting. Last year I was really lucky because it was an election year and so much money floods into Wisconsin in election years. And so I got a grant. And so that was great for last year, but then that was spent. And so this year I've tussled a lot with like, all right, how do we make this into a business? And I've been lucky enough that like I've gotten, a couple groups that have like, the most recent one was the DHS. So the Department of Health Services in Wisconsin was doing a campaign on trying to tell the small talks, and they were talking about underage drinking. And as you and I have both made probably plenty of low-hanging fruit jokes about drinking in Wisconsin.
No, me
drinking
never.
Wisconsin's
Yeah,
right.
It's an issue. It's an issue.
It's drinking in Wisconsin, period, and drunk driving and stuff, but also underage drinking, where underage drinking is going down. Like, that's not happening in Wisconsin. And so they were doing a campaign on it. They reached out to me, and I think they probably reached out to a lot of different Wisconsin bloggers and influencers and stuff. And, so like, that's a model as far as like having organizations that know that they want to talk about things in a different way, that they don't have the internal resources, whether it's comedy or whatever, like, that they know that like there's like, that's a model, but it also puts you in a position to like, I had one group, and I don't want to say who the group is or what the issue is, but it's a contentious issue that I actually don't know where I fall in. It's school choice. We'll just say it. So school choice. I don't know where I fall on school choice. I don't have a kid. I just don't know enough about the issue. But I had someone reach out to me who was interested in potentially having me do videos that explained school choice. And that was kind of where I was like, is this the right business model? Because I don't want to make videos advocating for something that I don't know where I fall on, and then take money for it. But I need to make money. So it's like, it's hard because if you're going to do a model that is talking about issues, but you have to limit yourself to the issues that you feel like you understand, and then you know about, and that you aren't just taking money because like you need to make money and like talking about any issue as it is, that becomes hard. But then to do a model where you're talking more about like Wisconsin companies, like a Quick Trip or a Culver's, or trying to get one of those sponsorships, like, because what I do is innately political, it's also like, do we want to, like, is this our best spokesperson is this the best partner because she's not just doing comedy, like that's fun Wisconsin stuff. It is innately political. So like, I'm still working on how to make money doing this, but that's where something with like working with like actual media companies, whether it's WTMJ or Journal Sentinel, and like working to help them kind of solve the same problem that I saw, right? That they know that they have their core audience who's been with them forever, but that there are hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites, largely a lot of young people, who, I'm sure there's people who don't even think that the Journal Sentinel is still in business, right? Like, it's just totally off the radar. And like, I don't know, like, people listen to podcasts. Do they still listen to the radio that are like younger people? Of like, where are you finding these other people, like pockets? And so what I think will end up working out well for me, and we'll say for next year, is like partnering with traditional media companies and bringing my talents to the table. And that feels like a more natural fit because they're already doing media, and helping them innovate. And then it also allows me to just have As Goes Wisconsin be what I want it to be, and not like fall prey to whoever's paying me to make that content. So that's a long-winded answer, but the short answer is it's hard. It's hard to like keep your integrity while still trying to make enough money to like pay rent.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what you're alluding to and talking here is it just mirrors the problem that a lot of news is having, and a lot of news in the same news entities are going to these bigger media conglomerates and falling under their umbrella because it's like, look, we don't have the resources.
Yeah.
So, but that's changed. At one time, news did have more resources, and at one time, and I think with this flooding of information that we have, and you can basically select where you want to get your information from, and there's no shortage of information. Breaking through that white noise of just celebrities, entertainment, sports, politics, whatever, people angry. I think a lot of people just shut it out altogether, or those who are interested are, just go to the ones that they like. So, I mean, first of all, props to you for like saying, no, this is important. This is what needs to be discussed, and then discussing it in a very funny and informative way. But it's really like, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg thing. Do I need the audience to come along before this becomes, the thing that will self-sustain itself? Or do I have to make them interested in it? And I feel like, you do a great job of like making people care about it just by the way you write it and put it together. So. Cheese squeeze, folks, excuse the interruption, but I want to shout out a couple of our sponsors. First, I'd like to say hey there to Duluth Trading Company. They got some fantastic clothing, folks, and we got Christmas coming up. What better way to tell your loved ones you love them than with some Duluth Trading Company long johns? Yeah, some of them even got the butt flap, so they're fantastic piece of clothing, and that's just the beginning. And then you layer them. You got the pants. You got the little under sweat wicking shirts on, and then you got your big coats and everything in between. The perfect amount of layering for any Packer game or hunting stand or grocery store. And I also want to shout out one more time, Jolly Good Soda, the pride of Random Lake, Wisconsin. It's a tasty soda, folks. They come in all different flavors, and you can get them at Woodman's, Festival Foods, Piggly Wiggly, Shop the Pig, Pick and Save, and others. And if it's not in your grocery store, just ask the manager, hey, you got that Jolly Good or no? And if they says or no, be like, well, you should, don't you know? And finally, folks, if you're looking for ugly sweaters, we got them. We got Midwest-themed ugly sweaters, including the Oak Christmas tree and Watch Out for Reindeer sweater at mandewalkmint.com or cripescast.com. You head on over there, get yourself, just something real pretty for the Christmas card, okay? Just think about the smile on all your relatives' face when you send out the Christmas card and the whole family's got Watch Out for Reindeer sweaters on. I mean, they're just going to think you're the most stylish sons of guns on the block. And of course, one more time, if you're looking to get the Midwest Survival Guide, we got it linked up right there on cripescast.com. All right, and that about does it for these ad reads. Back to the Cripescast. Do you have issues that you think are still being underreported in Wisconsin specifically?
That's a loaded question. Underreported, I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of issues I care about that feel like how have we not done this? If you watch my stuff, I think it's pretty obvious that I lean left, but I try not to be. I wouldn't say I'm a Democrat. Like, I'm not in the team Democrats. I just like the things that I care about is like having a social safety net and like having better, access. But the thing that I've become way more interested in that I actually do think is like a hard, nonpartisan stance is population growth. And like the fact that we have a brain drain problem, that people, we have these amazing universities and a lot of students do not stay in Wisconsin after they graduate. We have a lot of people moving out. We have an aging population, which is like when we talk, funny how the labor shortage is still a problem. But that's actually maybe what is like, there was this huge labor shortage that we were all talking about when they like the certain politicians were like, it's the extra money. But it's like, no, we still have a labor shortage, even though the extra unemployment is gone. But like, we have a labor shortage because of an aging, declining population. And so if you make the goal of how do we get people to stay? How do we get people to move here? How do we get people like you and me to move back to Wisconsin? And you put that on the city level, then it becomes the strategies to do that goal. But it's hard to be against that goal. It's hard to be like, that's a bad goal to have, right? Like, because there's so many other. Yeah, like, no, I want to live in a declining, like have more and more people leave my small town in Wisconsin. It's like, no, like thriving, where my parents live, which in Wisconsin Rapids, like when they grew up, that was an amazing little town that like the average, was like one of the highest per capita salaries because they had union paper mill jobs, right? And that town is depressing now, right? Like there's just not a lot of jobs and a lot of people leave. And so I think framing things in the way of like undisputable good goals to have as a city or as a state and talking about the issues that would get us there versus like how much coverage we get on like the culture wars. And that I would love to see more of that, like more stories on, actually breaking down while every politician runs on creating jobs. How does a politician actually do that? Like what actually are the levers that need to be pulled to get more tech jobs in Milwaukee, to have like an Epic in Madison? Like, how do we not have, something like that as a bigger city that still has three great universities here. And so like, it's problem solving like that and reporting that leads to things that are actually unifying goals versus like the, 10th article this week on critical race theory.
Right. Yeah. It's like, It is starting with common ground because there are so many, like we'll get to all those issues that everybody wants to, send all their really well thought out opinions on, which are usually not well thought out at all. But, look, I'll even include myself in that, like I've got opinions on a lot of things, but am I as well read as I should be? No. So some of them I just need to keep my mouth shut, unless you truly understand an issue. But there are those ones exactly that we like. Our environment, for instance, is one. It's like, that a lot of people think that is perceived as like a lefty kind of issue, but it's like, who you see Republicans now saying like clean air and clean water. Trump used to say that all the time. But do we have that right now? No, we don't have that. So we've all agreed that we want that. Let's just look at what are the things in place preventing that, because no business should prevent you from being able to drink clean water, but that's what's currently happening. So is it is in the larger issues that everybody agrees on, and there are more than I think anyone wants to give us all credit for, in those issues, is there hope that we will be talking more about those as people? Or do you think we are still set for another decade of fighting over things we barely understand? That laugh seems you're a little less hopeful than maybe I'm hoping you are.
I think we have, and those are like those are probably big problems out of my pay grade, right? Of like the access to content and the misinformation, disinformation, like the echo chamber, like the echo chamber is real, right? Like the unless you actively are trying to read different sources, and like I do that, right? Like I on Instagram I follow like Breitbart and I follow the Daily Caller or Daily Call or whatever, like follow a lot of right-wing things because like it's good to see what how things get framed differently, right? And like how as we're talking right now, the Kyle Rittenhouse court case is happening. He testified yesterday, and like you read comment sections and it's like if you could not have two more opposing viewpoints on this 18-year-old kid. And it was like it's just because of how it was framed to you and explained to you. And then your heels are dug in. So like that is so much of the core, I think. And I don't know how you fix that besides one-on-one conversations. Like, I think that's been the biggest change for me. It's in the change of how I approach the content that I make, but it's also like in the conversations that I have of coming from a place of empathy and curiosity and still having your opinions, but not completely dismissing someone who and like I won't, I won't engage with people who think XYZ. Like that certainly doesn't help. And I think that only can happen on a one-on-one in your personal life basis. Like, I don't know how we change the machine of like the media companies that they've figured out how they stay relevant and how they make money, which is, SEO and sexy title, like sexy headlines of how getting people to click through. So yeah, I would say, and like, that's a slow change, right? Like, and I don't know how that's gonna, on a macro big level, I don't know who's trying to solve that problem. But I do think the more you can talk about it in your personal life, the better.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good answer.
No, it does. It is a good answer because I mean, right now, all of the elements are lined up against people having constructive conversations with each other. The gerrymandering you're talking about, where you have these more extreme politicians, and then the politicians are more extreme, and then consequently, or in addition to, the news has become more extreme. Local news has done, I think, a pretty good job of staying, with the exception of Sinclair. I think they've done a decent job of staying somewhat issue focused. But, I think it's just having conversations like we're having about like saying, hey, this is an issue. So like when you're scrolling through stuff and you see certain headlines that are framed in an absurd way, just at least note that it's absurd. And I mean, I have no solutions on this clearly with like, just keep it in mind. That's kind of that's the solution. But and then you have the social media companies are obviously every time we look at our phone, it is curated to this echo chamber of whatever we've already said we're predisposed to. So yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy mindset that just wasn't around 10 years ago. So it will be interesting. But again, I think your work does a great job of sort of combating a lot of that and just diving deep into the issues. What do you hope ends up happening with As Goes Wisconsin and your brand more generally?
I have like no interest of going back to New York or LA. Like as friends that I've made, like friends who I've made who are still in the comedy game and they're submitting packets to late shows or like Jon Stewart's new show or even like Crooked Media. Like I've had friends like, and they'll ask me like, do you want the packet? Like, do you want to submit anything? And I was like, no, like, I don't like, that's not the dream anymore, is like be on one of these bigger shows. Like the dream is like, how do you take what a lot of those HBO, Comedy Central, or any of these shows that have done and like bring it here? And so that is the goal, right? Like the goal really is to grow a media company, like an alternative media outlet for Wisconsin news that does it differently. And some of it is politics and news, but some of it's also just like celebrating the Packers and celebrating like the stuff that make like up like what we have up north and like how great it is up there. And so but that's hard to do. You need money to do that. And so that is like a long-term goal, but like that is definitely the goal. Like right now, I think the overlap between this Venn diagram of As Goes Wisconsin and Kristin Brey is a circle. Right. And hopefully it starts to separate more, where like I could afford to, hire recent graduates who have their thumb better or their finger better on the pulse of the zeitgeist of young people, because I am certainly not young anymore. But like, and have it be a thing that like people, when they graduate, they're excited to work. Like they can stay in Wisconsin and work for something that is cool and fun and contributing to the state. So like, that's the goal. I don't know how you do that, but like it's certainly not just to continue just raising my platform. Like, I think it's a cool thing to be able to grow something that's just bringing New York and LA media here.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic really, made that much more of a possibility. A lot of people moved home. They moved to places with more,
Better
land
real
or
estate
yards.
prices?
Yeah, better real estate prices. And now a lot of people are working from home. So I think a lot of that brain drain in this state is going to hopefully subside a little bit. And also just the celebrating of this place that you do so well, I think certainly makes people think twice when they're like, oh, I have to leave to do X, Y, and Z. When you don't have to leave for the job, and then they're like, oh, I want to leave because the culture's better somewhere else. But is it, is it really? Yeah, there's a lot of great things here.
Like, it's like that very natural thing to flee the nest.
Yeah.
And then figure out that maybe you want to come back. So it's like, it's not like I get that urge. Like I from a very young age was like, I'm not going to Madison, I'm going to NYU. It's like I need to like get out of Madison. Even though, and so like that makes sense. But I think it's like, how do you create the cool jobs that make people want to move here? Like Milwaukee is an awesome city. Like I was just in California seeing some of my friends I went to college with for the first time in like 2 years because of the pandemic. And so I was in San Francisco and then I went to LA. And like none of them have been to Milwaukee, like none of them. And like a handful of them had been to Madison because they played like either college soccer or volleyball. So like they either played Wisconsin or something like that. So some of them had been to Madison or like they visited for school. None of them have been to Milwaukee. So they're like, what's Milwaukee like? And like the fact that like Milwaukee is such a fun, cool city that I feel like gets no credit is like, how do we change that perspective? Like, how do we get more on the map of being like, we have our problems, but no more than like San Francisco or LA have problems. Right. And like, how is Summerfest not a nationally known and sought out concert like Bonnaroo or Coachella or something like that? So there's just like, maybe we just need a better PR agent. Of like celebrating Wisconsin and like being like, this place is pretty great. And that's probably going to be the place as the world heats up that you can actually live.
I know. One of the few. A lot of fresh water here. And then we'll regret asking all these people to come here,
Yeah, that's true. Once Milwaukee gets, the prices of Portland and like everyone who just moved to Portland and then like, why did we ask for this?
Yeah, be careful what you wish for. What do you recommend for people who are coming up and they want to be in media? You obviously went out and you outside of Wisconsin, you did your thing. But given the day and age we're in today with where technology is, where you can do everything on your cell phone, you can build a following from wherever. What do you recommend if they want to do media in the same way you do it?
Honestly, it's just start. Like I naturally am someone who it's a very good procrastination mechanism of like everything has to be perfect before you start, or like you have to be good at something before you start. And that's just not how building a skill set works. Like you actually just have to do it and you have to suck at first.
Right.
Like I go back and look at the first videos I made. They're like very painful to watch.
Me too.
But if you don't start, like you only get better by doing it, and you only find your voice by doing it, right? Like when I first started, I was way more left, right? Like, and the stuff that I was making was way more like anti-Trump stuff. And it was only through doing it that I realized I changed some of my own beliefs. I changed how I wanted to talk. I made the choices like, I don't want to just talk to the echo chamber. I want to actually reach people who, and like, that's another good comment. Comments I get every once in a while, they're like, I don't always agree with you, but I appreciate how you talk about things. And like, that's a perfect person for me in my audience, right? Is like, we don't have to agree on everything, but as long as you don't watch something I make and immediately go, well, this isn't for me because it's too something, right? That is a win for me. And so it's like, but I wasn't always like that, right? And so I think it's only through starting. And so like, if you want to be a writer, you got to write, right? And like, even if you don't have a place to publish it, like there's Medium. If you want to be on camera, put yourself on camera. Like for all of these things, we now have the barrier to entry for all these things is basically gone. Like, to break through the noise and build an audience is a totally different conversation, but at least having access to do the craft you're trying to build, everything you need is at your fingertips now. And so like, that's the best obstacle I overcame, was just like, you just can't start, and you got to accept that you're going to suck at first.
Yeah. It's hard, I think, to just get the ball moving. But after you get through those first couple, you start to see some progress. And then that idea of finishing of finishing something, seeing it get a little better, that's sort of self-motivating in and of itself. So totally.
And whether it's, and even with like stand-up, like, I'm sure, like, I know, like, I've done stand-up, and I know you do stand-up, and so it's like, I got better, right? Like, you don't like knock it out of the park the first time you get up on stage and like with a microphone. But like, everyone who I've ever talked to does stand-up is like, the nights you learn the most are the nights you bomb the hardest, right?
Right.
Of like what you need to change, what works, what doesn't work. And so like, it's only through failure do you actually get better at anything.
Yep. Fail forward, as they say, right? Is that
exactly
the deal? Yeah. Well, cool. Is there anything I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. You want to talk about Aaron Rodgers? No, I'm just joking.
Right. I think he was right, honestly. Yeah.
Oh yeah. just total selfless guy.
I know.
But I'm actually going to the Packers game this weekend, so I still hope that he plays. No, I think this was great. I mean, I think like, I appreciate. There's like a lot of overlap. I feel like I get compared to you all the time of like doing Wisconsin comedy. And like, I just appreciate, like, that's a huge compliment, and I take it whenever I get it. But it's like, I think it's great. Like, I think it's great that like people like you, people like me, some of our other friends who are content creators, and people who like are doing the thing and just doing it here. And that like, showing that you don't have to live in one of the biggest cities, whether it's New York or Chicago or LA, to build something and build something that's relevant, right? And like, if anything, there's more oxygen here and more opportunity to be innovative, because there's just less people who are doing it. And so like, I think the encouragement of like I said, just starting and sticking around and advocating for the state and the city is all. So I appreciate as many compliments as you gave me. I appreciate everything that you also do and like have paved as like a model for being a Wisconsin comedian.
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks. I'll take that. Thank you. No, it's fun, and I do think that you're right. There is more oxygen here. You know, you can grow faster in this place because there's more opportunity. There's less folks doing it, and you're essentially encouraging your own competition, which is good too. Hey, when you're going to the game this weekend, what? First of all, are you tailgating or no?
Definitely tailgating. We got it could be a whole thing, because we're going with two friends, and then so my family has tickets, so we have season tickets. So I have the 4 tickets for the family, but then my aunt and uncle finally got off the waiting list, so they also have tickets, and they're taking my parents. So my parents are going to be there, so it's going to be a whole day, and then we're going to stay at the casino. Like, it's
great.
Gonna be, so it's gonna be fun. Hopefully, we also have a win. But yeah, I think we're just going to wake up first thing Sunday morning and get there and take in the day.
Yeah. Are you brats, or are you, what's your must have at a tailgate? Brats, Bloody Mary?
Both. I mean, if we get there early enough in the day, it's going to be a Bloody Mary. I'm not like an afternoon Bloody Mary person. Like Bloody Mary is like,
it's a
for me, it's noon or earlier. And that's for me. But yeah, so Bloody Mary, definitely a brat, definitely a lot of beer. Maybe I'll do a shot ski. I saw was at a game. I was at the opening game from against the Lions, and it's, I saw someone with the both the shot ski, but then the guy who has like the long pole. Have you seen that guy who like you can be like 20 yards, like 20 feet away, and he can like feed you a shot with his like extender thing? I was like, maybe I'll start to do that next time.
Yeah,
doesn't seem super COVID friendly, but like nothing is these days. Like I also was in the Deer District the night we won. That was also not COVID friendly.
Right. Yeah. Well, you guys will have a good time. I'm sure you're gonna be celebrating your engagement too. So congrats again on that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care. All right, and that is it for this week's episode of the Cripescast. Make sure you follow Kristin Brey at Kristin Brey on Instagram and at As Goes Wisconsin. Both amazing accounts. You will be very entertained and also informed. And you can follow the Cripescast. That's at Cripescast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Cripescast. Everybody keep her moving. Tell your folks I says hi, and watch out for deer.
So roll out the barrel and get the band brewing. Life's got you down, just keep her moving. It's on Wisconsin, the Badgers say it's the old Wisconsin Jubilee.
You know, sometimes when you're ice fishing, you put your foot in the walleye hole and go ass over tea kettle and you think you're done. No, you gotta keep her moving.